Hello, I'm Professor Andrew Nevins in the Department of Linguistics in Psychology and Language Sciences here at UCL, and I'm here to tell you about my research on when we mishear song lyrics. Now, take a listen to this clip by ABBA. Many people hear in that calling you from Tesco instead of calling you from Glasgow. Now, why should they hear that? Well, you might say because it's a song, and in music, people sing in falsetto voices, there are background instruments, and so of course the sound is obscured. But there are other factors going on as well. We might impose what we want to hear on the songs, and indeed, these kind of mondegreens, which are misheard song lyrics, have sometimes been thought of analogous to Freud's slips of the tongue. In Freud's slips of the tongue, it is said that the speaker accidentally reveals what he or she wants to say unconsciously through an error in production. In slips of the ear, it is sometimes thought that listeners impose what they wish to hear, or a song, or perhaps expect to hear in perception. So our ears can play tricks on us in this way, having to do with music, in a certain sense, lacking a specific conversational context. My research group and I have collected about 3,000 slips of the ear from naturally occurring conversations over the years, and we've looked at where these phenomena occur, and they occur quite a bit in spoken speech as well. Now, some of them are due to ambient factors, noisy pubs, lousy cell phone connections. Some of them are due to cognitive factors, speaking to someone with a different accent so that he or she may pronounce their T's or D's or indeed their vowels differently than you. Other ones may have to do with expecting that the word boundaries are lined up in different places. Now, in our research, we have noticed that certain sounds are more susceptible to, and certain words are more susceptible to these slips than others. So some of the softer or noisier or silent sounds like p, k, sh may be more susceptible to slips of the ear and to misperception than the more buttery vowel sounds like ah, and o. Nonetheless, this is not the only factor. And one of the interesting discoveries we've made is that there is a convergence, as in many areas of cognitive science with perception, between what are called bottom-up factors and top-down factors. Now, bottom-up factors are, in a sense, what we've been talking about, the fact that certain sounds like sh, f, are more susceptible to noise over cell phone connections, and so certain consonants and vowels may inherently be more fragile, less robust in the acoustic signal. Whereas top-down refers to our expectations. What are we expecting to hear? What do we want to hear? In that context, what is more likely? Let me give you an example. In face recognition, you may know your Aunt Bertha by her dimples, her eyebrows, and her nose. But if you suddenly find Aunt Bertha in the men's room, you may not even recognize her, because you don't even expect to run into Aunt Bertha in the men's room. That is a conflict between the bottom-up information, the pieces that make up the face, and the top-down information, who do I expect to see where? And that happens all the time in natural conversation as well, when we mishear things, sometimes with proper names, and sometimes with some of the most common words as well. One of the ingredients from visual perception that's been very interesting to study in psychology as well are what are called Rorschach blots. And Rorschach ink blots are sometimes used in psychology diagnostics to ask patients or individuals what they see. Now, these ambiguous images sometimes can look like a pedestrian object like a bicycle helmet, and other times can be interpreted as an amoeba dancing with a flamingo. Now, when we have these ambiguous cases, you might think, why doesn't the brain just simply allow two things to be at a tie? In the famous visual illusions like the old woman and the young woman, or the rabbit-duck illusion, why does our brain not say, aha, I see both? We oscillate between the two. We have to choose one or the other. And we have this insistence on making sense, persistence in making sense of sometimes an ambiguous auditory or visual scene. Now, where does this come from? Well, if you've ever tried to learn a language in an immersion context, where everybody around you is speaking a different language, you may have quickly learned that by trying to grab onto each individual word will not do you any good. You need to try to hear the whole sentence. You need to try to hear words in context. And indeed, children, when they're learning languages, don't say, "Mommy, I didn't get the third word. Could you repeat the whole sentence?" This characteristic we have of trying on the basis of often incomplete information to impose a meaning, to make sense of a noisy signal, is something that is a useful strategy in language learning, and I would argue is carried over through the lifespan even to when we are native speakers, lending itself to some of these slips of the ear. Well, what's the upshot of all of this? The upshot of this is that new words can be born sometimes through consistent mishearings. Indeed, consistent mishearings such as hearing a napron, you can imagine a kitchen piece of clothing here, used to be called a napron. And a napron was so consistently misheard by so many people that it became an apron. These kind of micro-mutations that may occur on the individual conversational level, when they occur enough over time, can lead itself to large-scale language change. If you'd like to learn more about this, we've chosen some particularly interesting examples from the domain of Mondegrin's misheard song lyrics. If you'd like to hear my first misheard song lyric in my own life, you can choose one here. If you'd like to hear the most famous Mondegrin of all time from Jimi Hendrix's Purple Haze, click here. If you'd like to hear an explanation of a very frequent mishearing in the Star-Spangled Banner, click here.